don't know if I can see myself at all. So, likewise, the Roman goddess Abundia, or the goddess of fortune and prosperity, became known as Habundia or Habondia, also as the queen of the fairies, but also as queen of witches, harpies, furies and ghosts. So a lot of the old gods became transformed and became local spirits, fairies, witch queen, etc. The goddess Diana also became the queen of the fairies. So the Roman goddess Diana, under her name Titania, became the queen of the fairies. And where have you heard of Titania? Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream. So that was the goddess Diana originally. So the gods kind of became transformed into lesser beings. And those lesser beings, though, were still invoked in folk magic. So they were demoted and became kind of under the Christian God. Folk magic often included prayers to Jesus, Mary and the saints, combined with local spirits. Angelic magic was also a part of cunning folk traditions, with old grimoires often containing invocations to angels and angelic talismans. Those who were accused of witchcraft, however, were said to have been in league with the devil, another Christian concept. And although the Christian depictions of the devil with horns and goat legs may be derived from pagan deities such as Pan, there is no evidence of a widespread witch cult who worshipped a horned god and a great mother goddess, as proposed by Margaret Murray in her seminal book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe. Anyone heard of that book? No. It was a book that was a big influence on the development of modern paganism and particularly modern Wicca. And in its time, it was an important work that people believed, but it has since been disproven. And in modern times, the word witch has been reclaimed and its meaning transformed. When people hear the word witch, the image that comes to mind for many is the evil old hag of fairy tales. A second popular image that comes to mind, however, is that of the sexy enchantress. And that's all of us, isn't it? Yes, beautiful and enchanting seductress, the image of a powerful, confident, a sexually confident and magical woman such as Medea or Circe in the ancient Greek tradition, Greek myth. Thirdly, modern pop culture has depicted various good witches, from the Good Witch of the North in The Wizard of Oz to the American sitcom Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And even before that, there was Bewitched, and you've got films like The Craft, etc., which have popularised witchcraft. But witches are still generally thought of as female in popular culture and have become a symbol of female power and independence. So the idea of witchcraft and reclaiming the word witchcraft and witch is also tied up very much with feminism. And modern pagan witchcraft tends to be goddess-focused and matrifocal, giving women power and authority and redressing the balance of hundreds of years of patriarchy, although it is open to both men and women. Witches can be men as well. For many women coming into modern witchcraft, it is about self-empowerment, reclaiming their power and contacting the goddess, a powerful female image. Whereas for men, modern pagan witchcraft allows an exploration of their feminine side, as well as connecting with the wild god of nature. Modern pagan witchcraft can be very liberating to both genders. As an alternative subculture, it is also accepting of difference, and therefore it's attractive to those who are gender fluid or trans, as the idea that we are all both male and female inside is expressed within modern pagan witchcraft. Though some more traditional forms of witchcraft have been accused of being too heteronormative and trans-exclusive. Likewise, Dianic witchcraft can be quite exclusive, as apart from excluding men, Dianic covens also generally exclude trans women. Many covens these days, however, are more progressive and inclusive and willing to incorporate new ideas and embrace individual differences. So with that, I've been reading mostly from my latest book there. I'm going to put that aside and start looking at my notes now. Okay, so what are the sources of modern Wicca? Any ideas, any thoughts? How did it develop?
Gerald Gardner.
Right, so Gerald Gardner is generally thought to be the father of modern witchcraft, of modern Wicca, but he didn't just invent it out of nowhere. He was influenced by a lot of things that were going on at the time, and there were a lot of different currents that were coming together that influenced the development of Wicca. And I think if Gerald Gardner hadn't put it together in the form that it is now, someone else would have, because all those forces, those influences were there already. So one influence is folklore and folk magic practices. Those remnants of old paganism, of old pre-Christian traditions that have never gone away. So folk magic, countryside magic, field blessing rituals, making corn dollies, little blessings and charms, little healing spells, etc., that are remnants of pre-Christian traditions. Secondly, the cunning man and cunning woman traditions. So the cunning men and cunning women, they used folk magic, but they also used the grimoires. So they also used more kind of occult symbolism, the keys of Solomon and angelic magic, etc. So there was a mixture of folk traditions and ritual magic involved in the cunning man traditions and cunning woman traditions. And talking of ritual magic, there were people like Aleister Crowley, and before him the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. You all heard of them? Most of you have, yeah? So the magical tradition was already quite strong in Britain, going back to the Elizabethan times and the Renaissance, and John Dee and angelic magic, etc. And then you have Freemasonry. So Freemasonry also preserved a lot of ancient and occult traditions. So Freemasonry, although initially you were supposed to be a Christian to be a Freemason, it did draw on various other spiritual traditions, and these days you just have to believe in God to be a Freemason, whatever you see God as. You just have to be spiritual. You don't have to be a Christian anymore. And it did draw on various other spiritual traditions, such as ancient Greek philosophy and ancient Egyptian magic, etc. And in fact, in Greece, the Orphics, the people who follow the Orphic mysteries, the mystery tradition from the ancient Greek religion, in modern times, they got together through Freemasonry, because the Orthodox Church in Greece was very, very strong, and it was very difficult to get together in any kind of public setting if you weren't a Christian, if you wanted to practice any kind of other religion. But through the mysteries of Freemasonry, they could contact each other, and they developed Orphic lodges within Freemasonry in Greece. And similarly in Britain, Freemasonry has various different spiritual lodges focusing on different sorts of traditions, and you've got Rosicrucianism as well. Then you've got the English Romantic poets. Any of you into poetry? Or read any of the poets? Or even Shakespeare? So Shakespeare, he uses a lot of pagan ideas in his works. So he's got, for example, his poem, his sonnet of Venus and Adonis. So it's mainly the classical gods that Shakespeare draws on. Titania, the fairy queen, etc. Puck, who's really Pan, etc. And even before Shakespeare, you have Chaucer. So Chaucer, anyone heard of Chaucer or read Chaucer? Yeah. So Chaucer again drew on classical mythology and the classical gods with things like the Knight's Tale. I think the Knight's Tale was about Theseus. So very much the ancient Greek mythology. So the English poets were very influenced by classical mythology and the classical gods. And you've got poets like Keats and Yeats and Byron. And Byron was very much into the Greek mythology, and very much he was a Hellenophile. He loved the Greeks and Greece, and he went and helped the Greeks in their wars against the Turks. And a lot of his poetry, it does invoke the classical gods. He tends to use the Roman names because that seems to be more popular in Britain at that time, using the Roman names for the gods. But the Greek gods and the Roman gods were very similar. And of course, we had the Roman invasion in Britain much earlier, so the Roman gods were more familiar. We still have shrines and remains of temples to Roman gods in Britain as well. So we've also got the archaeology and the remnants of ancient pagan cultures in Britain from the archaeology. And the English poets, when it got to around 17th, 18th century, there was a pagan revival in the poetry and the myth of Merry England, where they would invoke the great god Pan and the earth goddess. It was all very much based on classicism, but it was also getting back to nature and back to earth, and this romanticised idea of the great god Pan and Mother Nature. So some of the poets did self-identify as pagans, but there was no organised pagan movement. It was just individual poets, and it tended to be something that was more the intellectuals, the poets and the intellectuals. And then you've got the woodcraft folk. Anyone know anything about the woodcraft folk?
I've heard them, but not a lot.
Any idea what they are? Yeah, they're kind of like a version of the Boy Scouts, but they tended to be...
I think my wife was in it once.
Right.
Years ago.
Right.
I think she was in that at one time.
Yeah, so there is a theory that Gerald Gardner, that the supposed coven that he was initially involved with were actually a group of woodcraft folk. So the woodcraft folk, they were kind of like Boy Scouts, but they were very much about getting close to nature, and they may have just been a cover for a coven, though. It's very difficult to get to the truth as to what was actually happening there. Gerald Gardner said he was initiated into the New Forest Coven. We don't have any firm evidence that the New Forest Coven existed, but there were a group of woodcraft folk. There was also some theatre groups which did put on some more kind of esoteric type plays, etc. The Dorothy Clutterbuck, who Gerald Gardner spoke of, no one really knows who she is. And then there's George Pickingill, who, again, they're people who have a similar name who are known about in the census, but whether that's him or whether he was a made-up character, we're not entirely sure. There are books that explore that in more depth, and it's not something that I'm going to go into depth about today. So there were a lot of people around at the same time as Gardner and before Gardner, who were worshipping the old gods and reviving paganism. There was also an interest in psychic studies and a big kind of surge in interest in psychic studies. And then you've got the Renaissance and the Italian witchcraft and folk traditions. As I mentioned earlier, Diana as fairy queen, the idea of the wild hunt, and Habundia as queen of the fairies. And then we had some literature come about. So Aradia, Gospel of the Witches by Charles Leyland. Anyone heard of that? Yeah? So Charles Leyland was an anthropologist, and he spoke to an Italian woman called Maddalena, and Maddalena told him about the witch cult in Italy. Now, she might have made it all up, or it might have been true. Again, we can't really tell, but it's she gave a lot of spells and invocations, and it's where the name Aradia comes from, which a lot of Wiccans use as the name of the goddess in modern British Wicca. And according to this Maddalena, Charles Leyland's informant, Aradia was the daughter of Diana, the goddess of the moon, the Roman goddess of the moon, and Lucifer. Lucifer is not the devil. Lucifer is the god of the morning star. And they were brother and sister, but they also had a child together, which was Aradia. And Aradia came to Earth to lead people into freedom. So the Italian witchcraft was very much about liberation of the people who were oppressed. And so she came to kind of lead a revolution or lead them into freedom. And so some of modern Wicca comes from Aradia. Bits of the charge of the goddess come from Aradia, and some of the ideas come from that work. Then there was the witch cult in Western Europe by Margaret Murray. So Margaret Murray was a historian, and she wrote this book which influenced the pagan revivalists a lot. She believed that there was an ancient pagan tradition which worshipped a horned god and a great mother goddess, and that was all over Europe, and that people were to get together in some kinds of covens and worship these deities. Again, her work has been disproved since, but it was a huge influence on the development of Wicca. Then there's Robert Graves, The White Goddess. Anyone read that or heard of it?
I've heard of it.
So Robert Graves was an English poet. He wasn't a historian, so he used a lot of poetic license in his work. He never really intended his book to be a historical fact. But it was from Robert Graves that we get the idea of the threefold goddess, the maiden, mother, crone, although there were earlier writers who mentioned that before him, that he just made it more popular. He also talked about the tree alphabet and the Ogham and various other things that are quite popular in modern paganism. And another book that was important was The Golden Bough. So The Golden Bough by Fraser, George Fraser, which was an exploration of mythology around the world. And the ideas in that book also are a big influence on the development of the craft. Another important book is The Golden Ass by Apuleius, a Roman writer. Anyone heard of that or read that one? No? So the Golden Ass, also known as Metamorphosis, it's an alternative name for it, is about a man who is, I can't remember what he did, but he was a criminal. He had to be punished for something, and his punishment was being turned into a donkey. And as a donkey, he had to perform lewd sexual acts with women for public amusement. And the story is all about how he gets changed back into his human form. And it includes an invocation to Isis, where he goes to the beach and he puts his hoof into the sea 3 times and says a prayer to Isis. And Isis appears and turns him back into human form. And again, parts of the charge of the goddess come from that work. So the charge of the goddess in modern Wicca has been put together from these various different sources, plus Doreen Valiente's poetry. Another source is the Druid revival, which was also happening about the same time. So Gerald Gardner and Ross Nichols knew each other. Ross Nichols, who was very prominent in the Neo-Druidic movement, started to put together the Wheel of the Year, but his influence was more of the Celticism. The influences that I've spoken about so far have been more classicism. So you can see how Celticism and classicism come together in Wicca. The Wheel of the Year, initially, I believe they just celebrated the 4 fire festivals plus the winter solstice, and then eventually Gerald Gardner and Ross Nichols got together and added some festivals, the equinoxes and the summer solstice, and created the Eightfold Wheel of the Year. So the Eightfold Wheel of the Year, as it stands today, that most modern British pagans or Western pagans celebrate, is a modern creation. All the festivals were celebrated at some point in history by one culture or another, but there was no single culture that celebrated those 8 as they are now. But they've become pretty popular now amongst pagans. Most modern pagans, Western pagans, do celebrate those festivals, unless you're a Reconstructionist, say a Roman Reconstructionist or a Hellenic Reconstructionist, where you might use a completely different calendar. But in Wicca, it's the Eightfold Wheel of the Year. So Yet another influence on the development of Wicca was naturism. So Gerald Gardner was a naturist. So he belonged to a naturist club, and that's where he got the idea of being naked in your rites, being closer to nature through being naked in rituals. Then there was psychical research and mediumship, and that was becoming very popular at the time. And there was a big crossover between psychical research and mediumship. And Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente then coined the name Wicca, sometimes spelt with just one C, W-I-C-A, or Wicca with two C's, and formalised the ritual structure, the degree system, and the religion, and wrote the Book of Shadows. The Book of Shadows itself was named after a Hindu divination book based on measuring people's shadows. It had nothing to do with Wicca in the first instance, but Gerald Gardner just liked the name and thought, yeah, I'll use that for our grimoire. Gerald Gardner wasn't the only one around. There was also other people such as Robert Cochrane. Robert Cochrane started a group called the Clan of Tubal Cain. He was a contemporary of Gardner. His form of witchcraft was less formalised, more shamanistic, based on the ideas of Graves' White Goddess. He had no Book of Shadows, and they worked robed. And the god and goddess that they worshipped were Hecate and the horned god, who he considered to be manifestations of fate and time, which really is the ancient Greek idea of Chronos and Ananke, fate and time. Then there was Sybil Leek, who was a self-described witch who wrote books on witchcraft, and she was the first president of the Witchcraft Research Association, which was set up to unite and study different strands of witchcraft. Now, Robert Cochrane, there are still a few covens that follow his tradition, but it didn't take off mainly because he died very young. I believe he committed suicide when he was only about 30. So his tradition didn't take off in the same way that Gardnerian witchcraft did. And Sybil Leek was more of a solitary rather than running covens. And then we have Alex Sanders. So Alex Sanders really popularised Wicca. He was a very public showman. He was a Gardnerian initiate, so if you are an Alexandrian Wiccan, you're still a Gardnerian, really, because it's the same lineage. But he changed things a bit, he mixed things up, he introduced a lot more ceremonial magic, Egyptian magic, wearing strange headdresses and fire rituals and whatever he felt like putting in, and putting on stage performances. And he initiated an awful lot of people. And he also had this practice of inviting people back to his place to initiate them, tying them up, blindfolding them, and then going down the pub. Yes, eventually he would come back and very, very drunkenly perform the initiation. But yes, he was quite instrumental in the popularisation of Wicca. For a good while, though, there was some conflict between Gardnerians and Alexandrians, and a bit of snobbery from the Gardnerians, I think, about because of the way Alexander's was. The Gardnerians did not like the way Alexander kind of popularised it, etc. There was a lot of conflict for a while, but I think these days everyone's kind of come together, and people don't really distinguish anymore, because when it comes down to it, every coven is autonomous, and there's really more difference between individual covens than there are between the two traditions, because we all mix it up. So what is Wicca actually all about then? I've talked about the history and development. Let's talk about what it is, what it actually is. So I see witchcraft or Wicca as having three main components: religious, mysticism, and magical. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those components, and a quick plug for my book. My latest book has sections on each, a whole section on each of those sections with several chapters on each as well. So regarding the religion, the theology of Wicca is duotheistic. That is, it has two deities, a primal goddess and a horned god, and the horned god is the son and lover of the goddess. And it's generally considered that all goddesses are one goddess and all gods are one god, but they have different names and aspects. So the great mother, the great goddess, is Isis, Astarte, Dione, Hecate, Demeter, Kali, etc. As in the charge of the goddess says, I who was worshipped under many names at the beginning. And the horned god is the sun god, he's the lord of the greenwood, he's the lord of the beasts, etc. He's Lu, he's Hern, he's Canunus, he's Apollo, etc. And the goddess and the god have these major aspects, different major aspects as well. So the goddess is generally seen as threefold, the triple goddess, the maiden, mother and crone. And this is based on Robert Graves's White Goddess book. And these three aspects correspond to the phases of the moon: the waxing moon, the full moon, and the waning moon. So the waxing moon is the maiden, the full moon is the mother, pregnant and round, and the waning moon is the crone or hag or wise one. Goddesses from different traditions are then classified according to these archetypes. So sometimes goddesses such as Hecate, who's a Greek goddess, is seen as being a crone in Wicca, although she was never actually a crone in ancient Greek religion. She's always depicted as a maiden in ancient Greek religion, but because she has this underworldly aspect, she's been given this kind of crone role in Wicca. The goddess is renewed each spring. The goddess never dies. She's also the star goddess, the dust of whose feet are the hosts of the heavens, whose body encircles the universe. She is Mother Earth. She is the queen of the sun, queen of the moon, queen of the earth, and the mighty mother of us all. And in Wicca, she's generally called Aradia or Habundia. The god is twofold. He's the lord of light and life, the god of the sun and the greenwood, and the lord of dark and death, or the dread lord of shadows. And these different aspects are worshipped according to their season. The Oak King and Holly King also reflect these, the god of the waxing and the waning year, respectively. The Lord of Light is born at solstice, at the winter solstice. He becomes the Corn King at harvest. He's sacrificed at the autumnal equinox with the last grain harvest. And he descends into the underworld and becomes the dread Lord of Shadows at Samhain. Then he's reborn through the goddess at Yule or the winter solstice as the child of promise, the conquering sun, and the cycle begins again. In Wicca, he's generally called Canunus or Carnana. Our gods in Wicca are seen as immanent. They're immanent in nature and in the world. So this is a form of pantheism. The gods are in everything. Though they also have a transcendent aspect, which is panentheism. That is, everything is in the gods. So pantheism is gods are in everything, or the god is in everything. Panentheism is everything is inside the gods, but they have something outside as well. And this is expressed in the words of Isis carved on a temple wall in Egypt. I am all that is and was and ever shall be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. The gods are also within us as well as without. We each contain a spark of divinity. In Wiccan ritual, the goddess and god are drawn down into the high priest and high priestess, who become the substance of the sacrament. And a bit from the charge of the goddess here. And you who seek to know me, know that your seeking and yearning shall avail thee not, unless thou knowest the mystery. For if that which thou seekest thou findest not within thee, thou shalt never find it without. For I have been with thee from the beginning, and I am that which is attained at the end of desire. So the gods are within us, and it's within that we must look, rather than always chasing after things on the outside. Happiness comes from within us, and our relationship with the divine comes from within us. Some covens also call upon Drighten or Drichten, the ancient providence, which was from the beginning both male and female, the source of all. And here's an invocation which includes that. In the name of Drichten, the ancient providence, which was from the beginning and is for eternity, male and female, the original source of all things, all-knowing, all-pervading, all-powerful, changeless, eternal, in the name of the Lady of the Moon and the Lord of Death and Resurrection, in the name of the mighty ones of the four quarters, the kings of the elements, bless this place and this time, and they who are with us. So Drichten or Drighten is that oneness from which the two emanate, from which the goddess and the god emanate. So that's a kind of emanationist theology. From the one comes the two. Nature spirits and indwelling spirits of sacred sites, mountains, rivers, the sea, planets, stars, etc. are also honoured. And in Welsh Wicca, we call these Ir Hyniriaid, the ancient ones. Elemental spirits and guardians of the quarters are also invoked when the circle is cast, and different covens have different interpretations of what these quarter guardians are. To some, the guardians of the four directions are ancestral spirits from different directions. To others, they are the watchtowers, which are guardian stars of the four directions. To others, they are the four winds, Eurus, Notus, Zephyrus and Boreas, which again is from Greek tradition. To others, they are the elemental spirits, sylphs, salamanders, undines and gnomes, which comes from Renaissance magic and Paracelsus particularly. Some just call on air, fire, water and earth, respectively, bringing the elemental powers from which everything is composed into the circle. This is a way of connecting with the life force and the essence of nature. Okay, so what about the soul and the afterlife? So most Wiccans believe in some form of reincarnation. But when we talk about belief, that you're not really required to believe anything. There's no written laws, there's nothing written saying you must believe this, no creed like there is in the religions of the book, such as Christianity. But Wiccans speak of the Summerlands, or the Summer Isles, as the place we go when we die, thought to be a place of beauty and plenty, of harmony and closeness to the goddess and god, where we may be reunited with lost loved ones. But most believe this to be a temporary place of rest before one's next incarnation in a new life. There are, however, no sacred texts describing either the Summerlands or the process of reincarnation, and Wiccans are free to believe what they will, but tend to use a common language when referring to death, and the charge of the goddess refers to immortality and the eternal spirit. Most Wiccans believe in reincarnation of some sort, and that we will return, often in the same place and time as loved ones, and know and love them again. And this is expressed in the charge of the goddess. Mine is the ecstasy of the spirit, and mine also is joy upon earth. Mine is the secret key which opens the door to the land of youth, and mine is the cup of the wine of life, which is the holy grail of immortality. In life, I give knowledge of the spirit eternal, and beyond death, I give peace and freedom and reunion with those who have gone before. So there is this idea of reincarnation, but you can see that as you will. Wiccans talk about the Summerlands, whether they actually believe in it as a fact or not. It can be seen as a symbolic thing. Some people just believe that we're all temporary energy swirls that exist on this planet, and when we die, our energy goes off into different places. Our bodies rot into the earth and becomes the energy of plants. Our breath goes into the air, etc. So it's up to you what you believe. Wicca doesn't tell you what you have to believe. Now, something that's often asked by people of the book, religions of the book, is, well, where do you get your ethics from and your morals from if you've got nothing, no book telling you what you must believe or how you must live or what your ethics should be? Well, personal responsibility is emphasised in Wicca, with the only rule being 8 words the Wiccan read fulfil, and it harm none, do as thou will. So that is about personal responsibility. You have to decide what is harmful. And what does that mean? And can we ever live without harming anything? We can't really. So we have to work out how far we can apply that. It's more of a guideline than a rule. So it's up to each of us how we interpret this and how far we feel we can realistically apply it. Can we really live without causing any harm at all to others, to ourselves, to animals, to the earth? So as Wiccans, we seek to live in harmony with the earth and to avoid doing harm as much as we can with an Epicurean system of ethics. So Epicurus was a Greek philosopher, an ancient Greek philosopher, and his system of ethics was based on the pleasure principle. That is, a thing is good to the extent to which it causes pleasure, and it's bad to the extent to which it causes pain. So that it means we have to balance up how much pleasure and pain. So it doesn't mean you can cause harm to others because it causes you pleasure, because you've got to balance up the other person's pain as well. It's not just your pleasure and pain. It's understanding the whole influence of your actions. So you have to think about how you act and what the effects of your actions are, what pain is being caused, whether it's to other people, to yourself, to the planet, to animals, to plants, to the environment, etc. So the Epicurean system of ethics is expressed in the charge of the goddess in the line, "All acts of love and pleasure are my rituals." This means seeking to bring beauty and pleasure to the world and to others as well as ourselves, along with harming none and seeking not to cause pain to others as far as it's possible. Wicca is also a path of personal development where we seek to act with honour and be the best versions of ourselves that we can. And one of the most important parts of the charge of the goddess, for me, is the line, "Keep pure your highest ideals. Let naught stop you nor turn you aside, or you turn yourself aside from me." So if you don't keep pure your highest ideals, you are turning yourself aside from the goddess. So that's really important, is knowing what your highest ideals are and then working towards them, keeping them pure, always remembering them. In practice, ritual, most Wiccans consider that they celebrate rather than worship, and that they work with the gods rather than obeying them. Wiccan practice is generally informal ritual in a group, or it can be solitary. But it can also be simply meditating in nature. It doesn't always have to be formal ritual. There are two main types of formal ritual, though. The Sabbats, which are purely celebratory and celebrate the changing of the seasons, so that's the eightfold wheel of the year. They celebrate the abundance of the earth, etc. And then you've got the Esbats, or the lunar rituals, which are generally at or close to the full moon each month, where greater mysteries are enacted and magical work is done, and which are generally performed skyclad or naked. As it says in the charge of the goddess, "Once in the month, and better it be when the moon is full, shall ye gather in some secret place, and adore the spirit of me, who am queen of all witcheries. And I shall teach ye things that are yet unknown, and ye shall be free from slavery. And as a sign that ye shall be really free, ye shall be naked in your rights." So for an Esbat, ritual involves purification of the self and the working area, setting up the altar and blessing the salt and water. The space is then sprinkled with salt and water to purify, and incense may be carried around. A circle is then cast to create sacred space. When a circle is cast, it's not just a circle, it's actually a sphere. We visualise it being above us and going down into the ground below us, so we are in a bubble of protection. And it may be cast with a sword, but as you're drawing the sword, visualising a light coming out of that sword and spreading upwards and below so that it forms a dome around the whole group, or an individual if you're doing it on your own. The four quarters are then invoked, so the elemental powers, or whatever you see those four quarters as, and then the goddess and god, or sometimes Drichten or Driten, and then the goddess and god, depending on your tradition and your particular coven. And if you're in Welsh tradition, then you also call upon I'r Llenyddiaid, the ancient ones. Then there's the declaration of intent, and other spirits or energies may also be invoked. In my group, we tend to work with the trees of the month as well. Planetary powers might be invoked, and then generally drawing down of the goddess is performed, and sometimes drawing down of the god as well. So the goddess is invoked by the high priest, who draws the goddess into the body of the high priestess, who then delivers the words of the goddess, which may be just reciting the charge of the goddess, or it may be something more inspired and oracular. And then other powers might be invoked depending on the work of the ritual, the type of spellcraft that you might want to do. And then there'll be some way of raising power, which can be chanting and dancing. That seems to be the most common way of raising power, the chanting and dancing, but there are other ways as well, different ways of working magic. And if drawing down the sun is done, the goddess, through the priestess, draws down the god into the body of the high priest, who also delivers a charge or an oracle. Meditations or path workings might be done, and then magical work may be done. In most cases, in an Esbat, 3 different spells will be done, but not always. Depends how much work needs to be done. But any more than 3 gets to be a bit much. You run out of energy by then. After the magical work, the wine and cakes are blessed, and the coven sit and feast, and they may talk about their experiences in the ritual. At the end of the ritual, the spirits are all thanked. So the goddess and god are thanked, and the old ones and Richten or whatever, and the quarters are thanked and dismissed, and the circle is opened up again. Rituals for the Sabbats follow a similar pattern, but are often open and simpler, and some covens hold the Sabbat rituals as open celebrations which non-initiates can attend. And it's a good way for people who want to join a coven to get to know the coven by going to the Sabbats, seeing how the group works, getting to know the people, and also learning about the seasonal festivals. And generally there's like traditionally a year and a day between becoming a probationer to a coven and being initiated, although that period isn't fixed, it does vary. So drawing down the moon is generally not done in Sabbats if they are open rituals, and magical work is generally not done either. Some covens do, though, have their Sabbats as initiates-only rituals as well, but it varies from group to group. Offerings and thanksgiving take place, sacred dramas might be enacted, and a feast is shared. In some covens, Sabbats are robed, because non-initiates are present, whereas Esbats are performed sky-clad. So a coven is structured it's not a totally egalitarian group. It has a leader. The coven is run by the high priestess with the assistance of the high priest, though this does vary. There is an initiatory system with 3 degrees, and this comes from Freemasonry. It's brought in from Freemasonry. There's generally a probationary period before initiation, traditionally a year and a day, during which the candidate gets to know the coven and vice versa. Some covens have a dedicatory ritual at the start of the probationary period. Probationers will often attend Sabbat rituals, but not Esbats, and will not be required to work sky-clad, because that's a bit much when you first come to a group, want to find out about it, and you're expected to take your kit off straight away. I do know of covens that do that, though. I don't think it's to be recommended. It's a bit much if you don't know the group. And how can you trust the people? Or going into a strange situation and everyone gets naked and there's lots of wine, and it's a bit much. First degree initiation generally takes place if the person lasts through the probationary period, attends all the Sabbats and training sessions, and is a good fit for the coven. It is important for the group egregore that everyone gets on, because covens are close, personal groups. They're like a family, And you can understand how when you're all like getting together naked as well, that the trust and friendship and that family feel is really important in a group. You can't have someone along who just disrupts that energy. So the initiation, the first degree initiation will be sky-clad. That should be the first time that the person has to take the clothes off, and involves being brought into the circle naked and blindfolded and tied up, hands tied behind your back. So you have to have that level of trust. That's why we have that year's probationary period. So you're brought into the circle blindfolded, challenged with a sword, and asked to make certain vows. The working tools of a witch will also be presented to the candidate. They'll then, after their initiation, they will be a full member of the coven and an initiated witch, and will be expected to attend the esbats as well as the sabbats. They will be expected to do personal study as well as what they learn within the coven, and to study divination and healing techniques, learn how to design and perform rituals and spell work. And when fully competent and able to teach others all the processes of the craft and drawing down and all that kind of thing, second degree initiation may be taken. They will then be expected to lead and design rituals, and may, if they wish, hive to form their own coven under the supervision of the third degree high priestess or high priest. Again, though, this varies between covens, as does when third degree initiation is taken. Third degree initiation acknowledges that one is a fully independent witch and coven leader. Some covens have additional roles in the coven, such as the maiden and the man in black, and different duties are given to these people. So that's the religious side, structure, beliefs, etc. Now on to magic. So there are various different ways of working magic and spells within the craft, and you can be as creative as you like. So common methods are candle magic, talismanic magic, sigils, runic magic, cord magic or knot magic, linked hand magic, the creation of thought forms, making poppets, little dolls that you can put pins in or do whatever with, which can be for healing, it's not always for cursing. Elemental magic, so working with the elements and maybe natural substances, so using rocks and things, particularly if you're out in nature and you don't have all the equipment with you. You can just pick up a rock, you can pick up some soil, and you can work elemental magic. You can pick up some water from a stream, and you can work elemental magic with those things without any of this paraphernalia. Charm bags. So charm bags might include herbs and crystals and feathers and all sorts of things in a charm bag, each of them having different correspondences, and put into a little cloth bag, which you then tie up, and you bless and consecrate it for your purpose. And there's herbal charms. So herbal charms can be part of a charm bag, but you can also use herbs for other things. You can scatter them into the wind, you can burn them, you can make potions, etc. You can also make ointments and salves, which can be used magically. Flying ointment is one such thing, which contains all sorts of noxious substances, which such as belladonna and datura and henbane, as well as more benign substances like parsley, etc., in a fat base, and that is then rubbed onto the skin, generally at areas where your skin is thin and where the veins are, and those substances then go into your bloodstream and they can help you with spirit flight. Powder magic. So powder magic herbs can be ground into a powder, but you can also use resins ground into a powder, which can be put onto the fire, thrown in the air, etc. And creative visualization. Creative visualization is really important. It's mind magic, and visualization should be a part of any spell, whichever type of magical work that you're doing, any spellcraft. There should also be the visualization of your intent. But you can just do the mind magic without any of the other paraphernalia. But the other types of magic do help you with the focus. but it's what you do with your mind is probably the most important thing when you're doing spells. It's also tarot magic, so you can use the meanings of the tarot cards to represent what you want to attract things or get rid of things. And then there's sex magic, which is focusing the energy from sex within a magical circle and focusing the energy. So both partners would have to focus the energy into the desired result. So these types of magic are then generally done in the Esbats, and the spell work is taught in the Esbats once a person is initiated. But people can also be creative and come up with techniques of their own. Working magic involves intent, visualization, raising energy, and a structure or focus. Intent is all important. Training the mind to focus on the intent and to visualize are really important. They're the most important thing. Techniques for raising energy to put the energy into your spell include dancing, chanting, body work, breath techniques, sex magic, scourging, which is the whip, that gets your bloodstream flowing and gets your energy going, and drumming. There are other methods as well, and the binding, the ligature, can also get you into a different state of consciousness, which can help with magical work. Divination is also sometimes done in ritual. This can be scrying in crystals or in a cauldron of water or a magic mirror, or using cards such as oracle cards or tarot cards, runes, ogham, etc. Again, you can be creative as you like, and you can create your own oracles. So that's the magic bit. Now on to mysticism. What is mysticism? Any thoughts? What's it mean? What's it all about, eh?
Basically, sort of more to the sort of psychic side of things, drawn towards mystery and
Mystery, yeah.
maybe unknown for some.
I would say that mysticism is really about experience and the inner work. So in Wicca, we seek mystic experience and oneness with nature and with our god and goddess. This can be as simple as walking or sitting in nature and communing with the spirits, or rituals of drawing down the goddess and god such that we become a receptacle for their power. When you call the goddess into you yourself, or when someone else calls the goddess or god into you, you are opening yourself up to that divinity, and you are filled with that, and you lose your sense of self, of ego, and become one with the divine. And that's what mysticism really is, that sense of being one with the divine. And that contact with deity is really important in the craft. For me, that's the most important side of the craft, more important than magic or the rest. It's that experience. The ego is set aside and we become one with deity. To Wiccans, all of nature is sacred. And when we work with plants, gather herbs, or seek to cut a wand from a tree, we commune with the spirits of the plant or tree first, spending time in communion with it and trying to enter its realm. We then ask its permission to take what we need from it and listen for its response. We also make offerings, such as a libation of water or milk and honey for the spirits. We can sing to streams, dance for the earth, etc., to enhance our connection. Mysticism is about connectedness and feeling at peace with all. So, I think that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I'm open to questions, but I'm going to turn this off. I don't know if it's actually worked.